right. And I am running behind. Caleb, you have my deepest apologies. There is a time difference here that is not direct. So, like, for example, from my point of view, when I started the show, I started at 4:45. And so it doesn't have the clean hour. And so when I looked at the clock, I'm like, Caleb is here 15 minutes early. And actually, you were exactly on time. You have my deepest apologies for that. I'm still getting used to it. Welcome to the show, man.
Sure.
How you
Glad to
doing?
be here. How you been?
I'm doing okay. Again, you have my apologies. I don't like keeping my guests waiting. And when I just so happened to say, what is the time in Virginia? It was like 9:22. I was like, God damn it. 9:20. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
Hey, it happened.
Um, yeah, I just don't like it to happen, but I'm sorry. It
Yeah.
won't happen again. It won't
Okay.
happen again. Welcome to the show, man. Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin, just for the people to know, he is director for Center for. Wait a minute, give me 1 second. Caleb, I'm gonna pull up everything.
All
There we
right.
are. Um, there we are. Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst. He is director for CPI, Center for Political Innovation. Um, Caleb has written several books, and I always ask you the name of those books because I don't necessarily know if you put out a new book. You are a prolific writer. You like write more than most people that I know. What is your latest book, just so the audience would know?
My latest book is Trotsky and the Neoconservatives, the whole story, kind of getting into the background of the neocon wing of the Republican Party, how some of those folks originated among the folks who broke with the Soviet Union, followers of Trotsky. Trotsky and the Neoconservatives. It's gotten quite a good review, around. People have read it and appreciate it.
Yeah. Is it because that title is fascinating, and that title is going to be fascinating to a lot of people? Because is it because Trotsky was more of an interventionist, and you get neocons who take on that same similar interventionist politics? Is that the connection between the two?
Um,
I,
Trotsky very much incarnated a desire to spread chaos and instability all over the world, and that his radicalism, his attraction to communism was based on kind of an alienation from Russian society. He was very much in love with the Western left and its traditions. And when Stalin took the Soviet Union in the direction of building socialism in one country with a planned economy, rather than trying to have a global crusade to tear down every last king, and that wasn't of interest to Trotsky, and a lot of the intellectuals who had grouped around Marxism and Bolshevism left the communist movement with Trotsky because they were attracted to the notion of the permanent revolution. That was Trotsky's theory, the permanent revolution. And a lot of those folks then eventually broke with Trotsky, because Trotsky defended the Soviet Union and maintained the Soviet Union was still what he called a deformed workers' state. In 1939, in the lead up to World War II, they cut their ties with Trotsky and ultimately went into the U.S. camp. And post-World War II, a lot of them started working for the CIA. It's an interesting story, how one thing led to another, and now we have the foreign policy establishment in the United States of neoconservatism, many of whom went into the field of Sovietology and studied Russia and became like Russia experts from the point of view of opposing Russia, and set the stage for neoconservatism. And it's quite a long and interesting story of how they went from one to another, but it needs to be told, and it points to a lot of truths about Western political discourse and how confused and muddled things have gotten.
Wow, that is a fascinating breakdown. There's a guy who this is not what I brought you on for, but just as an aside, there's a book, I think it's called The Two Eagles, and it talks about how after the Second World War, the United States brought in Germany, or Nazis for all intents and purposes, and used Nazis as a way of working out foreign policy and incorporating a lot of, basically was using Nazis as informants on the Soviet Union. So the perspective that the US was getting about the Soviet Union were coming effectively from Nazis.
Yeah.
And how these people were like pushed into the CIA. The CIA was protecting this band of Nazis that it was using to spy and to give it intel on the Soviet Union. Oh, it's fascinating. Completely fascinating. Caleb, I brought you on to talk about Venezuela.
Okay.
It has become clear at this point that this is not a pressure campaign. This is a regime change war. This is a coup. Now, Trump is using this idea of, well, they can't really make up their mind. Maduro's a dictator. Maduro's illegitimate. They are using cocaine. They are putting in fentanyl. And they're going to come up with something else probably in a week or so in regards to why they're coming up with a justification for doing this. Drop Site News, this is Ryan Grimm's outlet, came out with this article that lays it bare, just lays it bare. U.S. intelligence has assessed that little to none of the fentanyl traffic to the United States is being produced in Venezuela, despite recent claims from Trump administration. A senior U.S. official directly familiar with the matter tells Drop Site. The official noted that many of the boats targeted for strikes by the Trump administration do not even have the requisite gasoline or motor capacity to reach the United States. Now, this was something that was obvious. Here's one of the pictures of them blowing up the boat. Take a look at the size of this boat, just for clarity of what we mean when we say these boats obviously are not going to the United
Venezuela
States.
and what is
I don't want to play the sound for this because I'm going to get dinged if I do. But this is 60 Minutes doing a propaganda bit for the Trump administration trying to justify the regime change war. That's a speedboat. That's just a speedboat. And the Trump administration is arguing that tiny boat is coming to the U.S. to bring fentanyl. And because of that, it allows the Trump administration to murder, 23 people in 7 strikes off the coast of the Caribbean. They are moving the drill forward to the area, to South America. And of course, they've been using Puerto Rico as this kind of staging base where they've been developing a huge amount of armaments and everything else. The article also makes the point of saying Guyana and Colombia are directly involved in this. Now, obviously, it's not the president. Gustavo Petro has been very angry about what's been taking place, especially since they've been murdering Colombians also. Give us the latest on this. What do you think is taking place here? I mean, are they really considering invading Venezuela in a regime change operation?
Well, I have been stating pretty consistently since this crisis began that there are 3 possible outcomes. The first is that we'll see a repeat of what happened in Trump's first term, which is that they will escalate, they will threaten, they will engage in provocations, and then they will move on, and then they will back down. That's what happened in Trump's first term, and that for a while they had the food truck provocation. They were doing a lot of threats against Venezuela, and then they moved on. The second possibility is that we will see airstrikes from the United States targeting Venezuela, probably done under the guise of these false claims about Venezuela being involved in the drug trade, and that would be a huge violation of international law. That would be a huge crime. It could result in civilian casualties, and it would just be an awful thing. And that's the third possibility, or the second possibility. The third possibility would be that there would be a direct ground invasion of Venezuela. That third possibility is a nightmare scenario for the entire region, because you would be taking a very stable country with a strong central government, and you'd be casting it into chaos. And Colombia has already said it would send its forces to fight on the side of Venezuela. Russia and China support Venezuela. There are already loads of Chinese tanks in Venezuela. There are Chinese airplanes. The Wagner Group, Russian military forces are there. And it would be an absolute disaster if people are concerned about refugees and people fleeing, cause Venezuela's central government to fall and create instability. You're going to have a lot of refugees. If people are concerned about drug gangs having influence, right now, Venezuela is pretty inconsequential in the international drug trade, according to the writings and publications of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency of the United Nations. But if you were to destabilize the country, those kind of forces tend to set up shop when you have instability. That third option of an actual war to overthrow the Venezuelan government, that's a nightmare scenario for the world, and it would have catastrophic consequences for the whole region. And we here in the United States, which we're particularly close to Venezuela, I mean, it's just south of the border, right? I mean, it's in South America. That would certainly spill into America, and that's a lot of what Trump supporters don't like. They don't like drug gangs. They don't like refugees fleeing here. Well, you have a direct ground invasion of Venezuela, you're going to have a big problem with all those things. So my hope is that we're dealing with the first situation, that Trump will give Marco Rubio the threats. He'll this is appeasing that particular faction of his administration, and that they'll get the show they want, they'll get the threats they want. and then we can move on. But the second and third options are very serious. The third one being the most frightening. Um, it has been revealed there are disagreements within the Trump administration about this. That Marco Rubio and Wyckoff are strongly at odds about what to do about Venezuela. It appears that just this morning, Venezuela and Russia signed some kind of strategic partnership, and people are wondering if the stalling of U.S.-Russia negotiations is actually related to Venezuela. On Friday, I actually got to meet the Russian Direct Investment Fund CEO, who is in town,
Krylov.
Kirill Dmitriev. Yeah, and I got to
Oh,
meet
Kirill
him.
Dmitriev. Okay.
Yeah, and he was in
Had it.
town for a surprise meeting. You can go to my YouTube channel and you can watch. He spoke with us. I greeted him
That's very
outside his
cool.
hotel. Yeah, I was very excited, and it was a surprise visit. And then we saw he said he was in town to have a meeting with unnamed officials from the Trump administration.
Right.
And the main remarks that he made to me and Russian media that were greeting him was about this Bering Sea tunnel and how Elon Musk's technology has made it much more affordable. So then it was revealed Sunday that he was here to meet with Ana Paula Luna,
Right.
who is a representative of Florida, a member of the U.S. Congress, and that's who met him. And they had a meeting to discuss it. And the meeting in Budapest that was supposed to take place, it wasn't canceled as much as it was postponed. And so
Uh-huh.
it's not clear what's going on. But now there's
Uh-huh.
this announcement that Venezuela and Russia have signed a military agreement, and I think that may be part of what has the situation on hold. It's like how is the USA supposed to make peace with Russia and end the war in Ukraine when Russia's very key ally in this hemisphere, Venezuela, is facing the threat of a direct invasion? Maduro has called for international brigades of fighters to go to Venezuela to support them. The militias are on standby. I mean, it's like, you put Venezuela on the brink of war, you put all of South America kind of holding its breath to see what's going to happen. And how could Russia possibly just sit down and say, all right, let's end the Ukraine war? I mean, it's, you can't end one war when you're about to start another one. Right. It's so, I mean, we're going to have to see how this goes. This is an awful situation. This is absolutely awful. And to think that now we're in a situation where the U.S. government is actually shut down. There's questions about how many U.S. military servicemen are even going to get paid. People are
Yes.
about to lose their food stamps, food assistance. There's going to be a huge run on the food banks in the United States because November
Already
1st,
is.
food assistance to low-income families is going to stop, and we're about to possibly open up a new war that will cost millions and millions and billions of dollars and will have catastrophic economic impact and refugees and all. I mean, this is awful. This is absolutely awful. And the USA needs to just de-escalate. As far as those ships, I have said from the beginning, if any of these ships were actually carrying drugs, they wouldn't have sunk them. They would have seized them as evidence to try and build the case for
Yes.
what the whole
Thank you.
world knows is not the case, which is that Venezuela is not a drug country. I mean, they're just not. So if these countries, if these ships actually had drugs on them, they would seize them and use them to try and build their very difficult case to make that Venezuela is a big problem in the drug trade. They're kind of trying to reenact the Reagan administration in some weird way, right? Reagan would attack countries in South and Central America on the grounds of them being part of the drug trade because it was the age of dare, right? Dare and just say no and all of that, and that was part of the war on drugs in America was military interventions in South and Central America in the name of opposing drugs. But we're not doing dare. We're legalizing marijuana. Marijuana is legal in almost quite a few U.S. states now. I mean, dare is decades in the past. I remember it from when I was a kid in the 90s, but most
So do I.
people it's just a memory now. So why are we threatening military interventions in the name of dare? I mean, this is weird. And then so it's cocaine that they supposedly have, and then it's fentanyl they supposedly have, and it's just getting stupid. It's just getting stupider by the minute. And this is Marco Rubio getting appeased and getting his appeasement, his favor from the Trump administration because he's part of the Cuban exile community that has an axe to grind, and they're not really concerned about the long-term foreign policy interests of the United States. They just want to overthrow a government in the region. They're at war with the Marxist governments of South and Central America, and this is a particular exile community that has been supportive of Trump. Um, January 6th, they made a big deal about the Confederate flags in the crowd, and there were certainly some, but there were a load of other foreign flags among the January 6th protesters. There were loads of Miami Cubans that were bussed in. There were loads of right-wing Venezuelans. There were loads of flags of the Shah, the Iranian monarchy, the Persian
Yeah.
monarchy. That lion, that flag, which is like a lion with a sword under it. And there were loads of Shah supporters who bussed in for the January 6th events, right? And that Trump has really made a big effort to, recruit all of these kind of foreign constituencies that want to go back to the homeland and overthrow the government. And that seems to be who he's trying to appease here.
Yeah, it's wow. It points out, it says Rubio's policy, because they're calling it, as you point out, Rubio seems to be the one that's running this. Rubio's policy was mostly recently at the crossroads when Maduro offered to turn over those oil resources to the United States in exchange for cessation of hostilities. The reporting that came out in the New York Times, I believe, was that Maduro offered Trump, says, look, I'll just give you the oil and let's just, leave me to my devices. Right here, it says Trump acknowledged the offer in a recent appearance when Trump pointed out Maduro doesn't want to, quote unquote, fuck around with us. Trump rejected the offer after being swayed by arguments by Rubio that the best way to secure Venezuela's oil reserves is to facilitate regime change in Venezuela and to make a better deal with the new government, effectively put in a puppet government and then rape Venezuela in regards to some kind of oil trade deal with the U.S. and obviously cutting out China in the process of doing so. So the goal of the Trump administration is regime change.
Yes.
Like, meaning it's not, okay, we're just going to pressure these guys. It seems that with the military arsenal that they're piling up, that they're not piling it up for no reason, that they're piling it up because they're going to use it. That's wild to me. And as you pointed out, the fact that the government is shut down and these guys, meaning the military is not getting paid. And they're still like, well, we're still going to use the military in order to kill a lot of Venezuelans and to try to topple the government of Maduro. That is an astonishing thing. That is an astonishing thing. What do you think the success, or let's say the consequence of this is going to be if indeed they go through with this?
Well, again, mass refugees, a big increase in the presence of drug cartels. It would be an absolute disaster if there was actually a invasion. Let's be clear, though. The policy of the United States has been to overthrow the government of Venezuela for decades, really since 2002 at least, probably earlier than that. I mean, Hugo Chavez was first elected in 1998. 2002 was when they had the coup where Hugo Chavez was arrested temporarily and removed from power and then brought back to power because of an uprising of rank and file soldiers. And since then, the United States has been trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela. And things really intensified in 2015 after the death of Hugo Chavez, when you had Maduro and then you had the Obama administration just amping up the sanctions. And I was in Venezuela in 2015 and I saw how difficult it was. But things in Venezuela in terms of, the food crisis and all that have really improved in the last several years. The last 3-4 years, things in Venezuela have gotten much better and the government is much stronger. And there have been many attempted coups. And again, if Maduro was going to, fall because of internal issues, that would have happened already. Maduro is quite strong at this point. He's been able to hold the country together through difficult times, and at this point, it looks like the USA is resorting to all-out threats. But again, I don't know that we're necessarily going to see a full-on invasion. We may. That is very possible at this point. We may see airstrikes, or we may see a de-escalation, and that the Trump administration may move on to another foreign policy theater. All of this is absolutely disastrous, and it is not done in the interest of the American people. I will point out, though, that it fits a pattern, because there's all these reports of Maduro making offers to the United States and such. Well, the reason the USA is not accepting those offers, and it's not about getting Venezuela's oil. It's about driving Venezuela off the oil markets. That's the goal, right? Iraq, they were a major oil exporting country that was selling oil in competition with Wall Street and London, and they were blown to bits. And that created scarcity on the oil markets. And now people who used to buy their oil from Iraq are largely buying their oil, from American and U.S. aligned exporters, and that Iraq's oil exports since the U.S. invasion have been roughly 10% of what they once were. And the same with Libya. Libya was the top oil exporting country in Africa. It was blown to bits, and now oil exports in Libya are down to like maybe 10%, 12% of what they once were. These countries, it's not like the USA goes there and gets their oil and starts selling their oil to make money off of it. It's that their oil just stops going out on the market. The country gets cast into chaos and instability. You get, the country is, different factions fighting for power, and the central state is overthrown. The infrastructure is blown to bits, and they stop selling oil, and then there's less oil on the market, so the price goes up, and the people who do then keep buying oil buy it from U.S. aligned people rather than the government that was there before. And that's how these oil wars tend to operate. When you talk about imperialism, we're talking about monopoly. People don't understand what imperialism is. Vladimir Lenin wrote his very, very important book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And he talked about imperialism is capitalism in its monopolistic stage. It's the export of capital, with the corporations being sent all over the world. Rather than selling products on the international market, the corporations themselves become exported. You can also read what was written by Henry Charles Carey about the English system, and he described, what was, the basis for maintaining slavery in the United States, and what, Abraham Lincoln was fighting against was this English system of, the big corporations dominating the world and centralizing wealth into one mighty city. And that was Henry Charles Carey, the economic advisor to Abraham Lincoln, wrote about this. Mm-hmm. And that imperialism is a system, and it is a system about maintaining a monopoly and holding back development in the impoverished countries of the world. That's the idea, is keeping Asia, Latin America, Africa, keeping them from developing their own industries, from selling their own resources and developing and building up their own economies, and keeping them under the domination of Western corporations. Classic example being when the British Empire went to India, they burned down all the textile looms and forced the people of India who'd been weaving and making their own cloth for thousands of years, forcing them to import their cloth from British corporations. And you remember, what was Gandhi arrested for? He boiled salt water, right, and made his own salt. And why was that a crime? Well, the law in India was that salt, you had to buy salt from British, salt importing corporations. And so he boiled his own salt because he didn't want the British to have a monopoly on salt. And so he would sit in front of the police and boil his own salt, and then they would arrest him. That's imperialism. It's about, taking domination of an economy and forcing them to buy products from you. And that's, NAFTA is a great example. The people in Mexico have been, growing their own food for thousands of years. But now at this point, almost all the food in Mexico, you have to buy it from American corporations like Kraft, right? Because the farming sector of Mexico was destroyed by NAFTA, with the NAFTA agreement, right? And so it's the export of capital. It's kind of preventing countries from developing their own industries and having their own economy, and making them just kind of captive markets where big monopolies can dump their products. That's the economics of imperialism. And that one of the problems that I have and I see is that the left has gotten away from this economic understanding of what imperialism is. People think imperialism is the movie Avatar, right? The movie Avatar, where it's like there's these beautiful people that live in the woods and have no technology and are just so pure and untainted by the West. And then the evil colonizer comes and wants to bring in electricity and modern housing and all of that, and and the nature, the people, the beautiful primitive people team up with the spirits of the forest to fight against that. That's Hollywood. That has nothing to do with the economics of imperialism. Anti-imperialism is countries fighting against the big monopolies so that they can have power plants, so they can pave their roads, so they can electrify, they can wipe out illiteracy. And the countries that have broken out of imperialism, they're breaking out of imperialism because they want to build. That's what they're struggling to do. And I've been to Venezuela, and that's what the Venezuelan government has done. They've built. I walked through a neighborhood in central Caracas where every building was built by an interest-free loan provided by the Venezuelan government. And before that, people lived in shacks without running water and electricity. But because of the Bolivarian government taking control of the oil, using the oil revenue to subsidize a domestic economy, now all kinds of people have housing in central Caracas. The Venezuelan government wiped out illiteracy. There was a lot of illiteracy in Venezuela prior to Hugo Chavez, but they wiped out illiteracy. They brought in Cuban doctors and set up Cuban healthcare clinics all over Venezuela, and basically healthcare is free and provided by Cuban doctors. And they paved the roads. They enabled Venezuelans to start their own farms. And it's interesting because Venezuela's economy is largely centered around government-controlled oil resources, but they use that government oil revenue to then subsidize different businesses, a lot of which are worker cooperatives, but not all of them. Some of them are just
Mhm.
regular private businesses. But it's the state that comes out of an anti-colonial revolution, emerged and took control of the oil resources, and then used the revenue to build up a new independent economy. And that's what the USA is trying to crush. And that when the oil prices were quite high before the 2014 oil drop, Venezuela was doing amazing things. They were building housing in Honduras and Guatemala. They set up the ALBA Bank, the Bolivarian Alternative for Latin America Bank, and were
Yeah.
subsidizing development throughout the region. And that is what the imperialists and Wall Street are really afraid of. They don't want an independent economy to emerge in Latin America. They want these countries as impoverished captive markets. And that's what we need to understand is going on here. This is a struggle for economic domination, and that the BRICS world represents a new economy that is based on growth. And what China's doing with the Belt and Road Initiative and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there are whole sections of the world that are building themselves up outside of the dominance of Wall Street. And that's what the imperialists and the big monopolies are fighting against. And that's what they're trying to do. They want to reduce these countries to impoverished captive markets and vassal states rather than strong independent economies. The struggle against imperialism is really the struggle against degrowth. When a country is overthrown by the United States, it's degrown. Instead of having a strong economy, instead of building itself up, it's reduced to chaos and rubble and instability, and that ensures the dominance of the monopolists. Imperialism is monopolistic capitalism.
So the goal is not to control the oil. The goal is effectively to destroy the ability for Venezuela to export its oil. Just
Yeah,
want to make sure.
yeah,
Interesting.
basically
Because I took
reduce
it as the other
Venezuela to
way.
chaos. Yeah.
Wow, I took it as the other way. I mean, because I think Chevron is one of the main companies that work with Venezuela in regards to producing its oil. And my assumption was that they wanted to take over the oil in order to drop the price of oil in order to damage, let's say, Russia, for example, as one of the major oil exporters around the globe. But you're right. In the sense of Iraq, in the sense of Libya, it was the opposite. It was destroying the capability for those countries to actually produce um, their oil revenue, basically increasing the price of oil, in which case the United States is one of the major oil exporters around the world now. Wow. I did not know that, Caleb. You're right.
There you go.
You're absolutely right. When you were in Venezuela, what did you give me your experience when you were there? Because I don't have the sense of it. I've never been. It's like Maduro's a dictator. People are eating dog food. People are meaning these are the things that people say. And by the way, they're saying the quiet part out loud at this point. This is Lindsey Graham, who is always looking for somewhere to overthrow, saying the quiet part out loud on TV, no less. Listen to this.
Military operations potentially.
The examples you're citing also involved ground troops. You said time for Maduro to go.
Yeah.
That sounds a lot like regime
Yeah, it
change.
is.
Are you talking about troops on the ground?
I'll let the president speak to that. I'm talking about a briefing that would.
Notice he kept saying over and over again, yeah. And she's like, it sounds like you're talking about a coup. He's like, yeah. You're talking about troops on the ground. I let the president talk to that. So there seemed to be hesitancy on that point. But from the standpoint of strikes and trying to overthrow them, that seems to be the game plan that these guys are working with. What was your experience when you're on the ground in Venezuela? I know you're saying they paved roads. The government was effectively using the oil revenue in order to build doctors and everything else. When you talk to people, what was the conversation? What was the feel of the place? And I know that sounds more esoteric, but I'm trying to get a sense of what it was like to be on the ground.
Well, I visited a farm cooperative in one of the rural areas where they grow chocolate, and I saw how they set that up, and it was a farm cooperative. I also I visited what was called the Center for African Knowledge, which is a building that they set up because there's a large amount of Afro-Venezuelans, Venezuelans that have African heritage, and there's a very large building called the Center for African Knowledge, and at the top of the building, it is a museum about Afro-Venezuelans and their history. And I guess Hugo Chavez, the founder of the revolutionary government, he actually was part African in his heritage and was quite proud of it. And that was the top of the building, was this museum, but it was, instead of having like an elevator or a staircase, it had like a ramp that like circled around and to lead up to the top of the building. And it was all stores that had been set up that were owned by Afro-Venezuelans. So you went up through this building, and it was all stores of Afro-Venezuelans who've been empowered by the Bolivarian government to start their own business, to make bags or sunglasses or whatever. And it was all these stores owned by Afro-Venezuelans. And then when you got to the top, it was a museum about Afro-Venezuelan heritage. And I remember that. And one of the points that they made is that when Hugo Chavez was first elected president in 1999, Venezuela had 12 public universities. You know how many it has now? 32 public universities now. Yeah. Can you imagine the difference? I mean, the amount of public investment that they did. The other thing is that the notion that Venezuela is not a democracy, they have bent over backwards to be democratic, to be transparent. Every voting booth that they have, they have an audit. There's an electronic vote that has to match the paper record. They have to, they get a receipt when they vote, and so the paper receipt has to match the computer record, or else they have to recount the entire voting thing. I saw how they run the election. I mean, the opposition participates in the election. They have ads on television. They have protests and demonstrations against the government. Almost, all the mainstream media outlets are against the government. The notion that Venezuela is a dictatorship, it's just absurd. I saw people opposing the government and criticizing the government all the time in Venezuela. I mean, it's not a dictatorship in any conceivable way. And that just goes to show you that they will always say, that a country is a dictatorship. That's always going to be the response when you have a government the USA doesn't like. The opposition helped design the ballots, and then they boycott the election and they don't participate. And then they say, oh, look, it was rigged. Well, you didn't participate. The Venezuelan system is very transparent, and it is very democratic. And there are people at this point that are trying to overthrow the government that have, at this point been boycotting elections. And they claim it's not democratic just because they don't like the leadership. It's very much a democratic country. You can argue that some countries that are anti-imperialist are in kind of a military lockdown. Countries like North Korea, et cetera, countries like China that have more of the old Soviet model of a political system. That's not Venezuela. They have multiple parties, they have debates. It's just simply. The notion that Venezuela is a dictatorship is just absurd. It just is not. And the Carter Center observed their elections and said that they were fair and free. And I went there and I saw the voting system. Venezuela is very, very much a democratic country.
What do you make of Machado winning the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, it makes the Nobel Peace Prize a joke.
It does.
She's a warmonger. She wants to overthrow and invade her own country. She looks at how Libya is right now. She looks at how Iraq is. She looks at how Honduras became in the aftermath of the U.S. coup in 2009. And she says, my goodness, I want my own people to be like that. That's one thing I can't stand, I will say. As somebody who lives in the United States, I cannot stand these people who hate their own people so much that they come to America and want America to bomb and kill their own people. I really can't stand them. I don't like a lot of what the U.S. government does, but I don't go around the world. When I go to Russia, when I go to Iran, I don't say, all right, go bomb America, kill a bunch of Americans. I don't say that. I want America to have a better relationship with these countries. But these people that are just there, Fidel Castro calls them gusanos, crawlers or whatever. And I cannot stand the bomb my country crowd of people that are just so mad. You can watch a video I did a few years ago outside the UN when Maduro was there. And I argued with these right-wing Venezuelans that were protesting Maduro, and I just filmed them, and they were completely crazy. And like there was one guy who claimed that he was, he had AIDS. He said, well, I have AIDS. And I said, are you trying to claim Maduro gave you AIDS? Well, no, he said, but I can't get the AIDS medicine that I want. Well, isn't that because of sanctions? Well, yeah, but and I'm just like, so and it's just and I would argue with them, and they just they really just hate their own people so much, and it's just there's like a tribal ethnic component to it. Some of it is really blatant. I remember when I was in college, the leader of Brazil, Lula da Silva, had just been elected. He was aligning himself with Nicolas Maduro and stuff, and it wasn't clear. I mean, da Silva is not really a full-on revolutionary, but he was, it was not clear at that point, and and Lula da Silva was elected. And so at my college there were a number of Brazilian students from Brazil, and so I remember I asked them, hey, what do you think of Lula, the president of Brazil? And they said, oh, he's horrible, he's a Marxist dictator, he's awful, he's just awful, and all of that. And I said, well, why does he win the elections and all of that? And they said, because we have this law in Brazil that everybody has to vote, and so all these poor people, who, have no business voting and don't understand politics, they go and they vote for him and all this. And I said, well, why do they vote for him though? And they said, because he gives them all jobs. He just gives them all jobs and they vote for him. And I mean, it was really blatant. And they kept talking about, did you know he used to be a delivery man? He used to deliver packages for a living. Can you believe this? Brazil, we're a civilized country and we have a delivery man as our president. Oh my gosh, he delivered packages, and I mean, it's really, really blatant. The old hard right wing, the Gusano hard right wing, they have like an ethnic tribal hatred for the poorer people of their countries, right? And it is like they want them to die. They identify more with America than with their own people. They're kind of embarrassed and ashamed. You know what I'm saying? Like, when I was in the richer neighborhoods in Iran, some of the wealthier Iranians who hate the Iranian government, who like admire the Shah, they would talk to me, they're wearing blue jeans and they're, driving their BMWs, and they'd say, we're white people just like you, Caleb, we're white people, people, you in America, you think we're Arabs, you think that we're actually Persians are white. And it's like, give me a break. I mean, it's like, there's an element of just, I mean, it's from all over the world. These people that they hate their own people. They want their country to be bombed. They want to be like America. And it just disgusts me. And I get very angry with those kind of people. I mean, it's just something like, I feel like, it just offends me on the level of like, it's like, you should love your own family. You know what I'm saying? If you saw someone like, like if your relative was being arrested or something, you should be there for them. You shouldn't be testifying against them in court, or you shouldn't be, supporting the police going after them. Even if they made a mistake or something, they're your relative. You got to be friendly to them. And I see these people who just, they hate their own homeland so much. They want the USA to, something's off about them. And it always just kind of grinds my gears. And what also I don't like is they pander to the ignorance of the American people. And that has always annoyed them, because people in America, they don't know. Right. And that, if you come to America, when you become a US citizen, I mean, it says on the form, are you a communist? And you have to say no, right? I mean, and if you're a communist, you can be denied your citizenship, right?
It says that on the form?
Yeah, it's one of the questions.
Are you serious?
Yeah, you can't be a communist and become a US citizen. So a lot of, these folks come here, and if they were to say good things about the communist government they fled from, they would obviously not be able to stay here. So they come here and they get attention. Oh, it was horrible. I fled the awful regime. It was horrible. It was horrible, and Americans hear that and they think that's representative of how the people there feel. And that's what Americans want to hear, because that reinforces the narrative we all have. But, in every former Eastern European country where, since the fall of the Soviet Union, they've done poll after poll after poll where every single one of those countries, people say life was better before the fall of the Soviet Union. Right. Yeah. And in every single one of these countries. And, I always get these people that will condescendingly say to me, Caleb, haven't you ever talked to anyone who lived under communism? It's like, look at the polls, though. I go to Russia. The Soviet nostalgia is very, very high in Russia. And in fact, in Russia, the Communist Party is considered the party of the elderly, the pensioners, the people who lived under it, but you get these people who come to the United States and pander to this ignorance, and people talk to some Miami Cuban, or they talk to somebody who grew up in Czechoslovakia or Romania, and they think they know the whole history of communism because, oh, I met this guy who, you know, lives down the street, and he said it was totally horrible and America's the greatest country that ever existed. And it's like, yeah, he came here because he's on one side, you know, and that doesn't represent everyone in the country. And that, you know, so I don't know. I have very little patience for the crowd of people. And it's like, you look at the results of all the U.S. regime change wars, it never improves the country. And if you argue that with these people, which I have in the videos, you can watch the videos on my YouTube channel, they don't care. I mean, you say to them, look, you know, is Libya better off? Is Iraq better off? I know you're mad at the government. You know, you say they're so awful. Are they better off? It just doesn't, it doesn't care. It's about, they want vengeance against the government. That's what it's about. The government, you know, took my mansion. The government overtaxed me. The government redistributed my plantation or whatever. I want revenge against the government. I want these people killed. They don't care about the ultimate result for their country in the long term. They could care less, you know, and that's the important thing to remember about them. You know, the Miami Cubans, they don't care about Cuba getting better. They just want to overthrow the government. You know, when there was the SOS Cuba campaign going on, you know, there were these Cubans marching around, SOS Cuba. It was like protests, you know, an attempt at a color revolution in Cuba. I went to it and I asked all the people protesting that were saying SOS Cuba, I said, do you support the blockade? And they all said yes. Oh, yes, we support the blockade. So then how do you support Cuba then, right? Cubans, there are Cubans who have diseases that could be cured if they could get the medicine. You know, you say you support your people. Why do you support the blockade? And everybody say, oh, yes, we love the blockade. We support the blockade. So you care about the Cuban people, yet you support a blockade that's preventing them from getting medicine and food and all this. Give me a break, you know?
Yeah, that's a particular pet peeve of mine too.
Yeah.
I mean, because look, it's as much as I despise the government of the US, these people are sociopaths. Nothing in me would want the US bombed.
Exactly.
If that makes sense. Like, not like my family lives here, right?
Yeah.
like I don't hate Americans. I despise the government. There's a difference in those things. And you know, the push that I make is against the way that the government operates and the policies that the government takes on. Yeah, I think the public are Muppets in some respects, but I don't want them bombed and killed in the context of trying to change the government. Machado is out there screaming for the government to be attacked by the US. And it's like, okay, how do you give that person a quote unquote peace prize who's calling for war against their own population? Man. And it's like when they do those airstrikes, for example, they've just murdered 27 people, 25 random people. Murder. Machado will probably have no issue with that.
Yeah.
That's amazing to me.
Yeah.
And if they do airstrikes, again, they're going to be murdering civilians because Venezuela is not part of the drug trade in the sense of putting fentanyl in the United States. So those targets is going to be against government targets with the idea of trying to overthrow the government. They're not going to be random. Trump may call them, we hit cocaine centers, but all intents and purposes is going to be issues associated with the government. Yeah. They're just going to murder people. She's okay with that. That's amazing to me. That's just mind-blowing to me. It's the blank check thing, right? Like you give these people a blank check, and because you give them a blank check that, hey, you have a superpower backing you, they feel that they can pretty much do anything because they have a superpower backing them. So we don't have to engage in a real political process. We can forego the elections and then claim that we were cheated. We can claim that he's a dictator. We can claim, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because there's a superpower backing us with a megaphone. That would 60 minutes in that story, you have person after person screaming that Maduro's a dictator.
Yeah,
it's amazing. They just, I mean, you know, they're confirming. It's almost like they're building the case for an overthrow.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Well, I'll just say this, and then I probably have to go after this, but I'll just say this because I got a story I've got to hit the street. But let me just say this. You know, Venezuela is very transparent. They have a very open system. But even countries like North Korea, even countries like China or countries like Iran, where their political system isn't as open, I would argue that those countries are more democratic than America. And I'll tell you why. Democracy means the rule of the people. That's what it means. The people rule. And Venezuela, they wouldn't be in power for a day if it wasn't for a huge network of well-organized people among the population that are organized in these things called Bolivarian circles that carry out the goals and the vision of the revolution on a local level. And in Iran, they have these things called Basij councils, the mobilized oppressed. And in every neighborhood, there's a Basij council that carries out the goals of the revolution. You go to China, the Communist Party, they're in every apartment building, every neighborhood. And the Chinese government wouldn't be in power if they didn't have a really well-organized section of the population that wakes up every day and says, I'm trying to carry out the Communist Party's goals. And in my neighborhood, I'm going to try to do what the Communist Party wants to do. And we don't have that in the West. Our leaders want us involved as little as possible. Our leaders could care less what we think. Whereas these governments, these anti-imperialist governments, to stay in power, they need the population to be heavily, heavily involved in carrying out their goals and activities. So even if they don't have the level of free speech or the level of openness, they rely on citizen involvement and democratic participation. And that is something that you can't deny. Maduro needs those Bolivarian councils, and they are loyal to him and they carry out their goals, and that's why they're in power. And Iran needs those Basij councils, and China needs those local Communist Party organizers, that they depend on citizen involvement to carry out their rule. And that's something that people who ramble about democracy, they think democracy means free speech or freedom of assembly. Well, democracy means the rule of the people. And in these countries, the people are way more involved in ruling than they are in America.
Caleb, you're awesome. You're awesome. I'm always informed when you come on the show, and I always appreciate you coming on this show. By the way, again, you have my deepest apologies for earlier.
All good. All good.
The time, like for example, it is 7:56 my time, which is like 50 minutes off kilter. It's just very weird. The time thing is very weird. I'm gonna have to get used to it. But you have my deepest apologies. I hate keeping people late.
I love coming on your show. You always do great stuff. You have great guests. You always have a great lineup. I don't know how you keep track of all these people you have. You have so many great guests on your show. So, yeah.
It is a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. Caleb Maupin, he is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst. He's author. He is also director for Center Political Innovation. They do all sorts of stuff. These guys are very and super active. So you heard him talking about the people that he was engaging. Center for Political Innovation. Definitely look him up. Definitely check him out. Definitely check out his YouTube channel at Caleb Maupin. Caleb, I always say, man, I could listen to you for hours. You are so knowledgeable about such a wide range of things that I'm always informed when you come on the show. So thank you for it. You be safe.
Thank you. Talk to you soon. Yep. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.